The howling blizzard outside threatened to tear the roof off the small roadside diner, but 24-year-old waitress Clara ignored the terror, guided only by the lingering scent of frying oil and one desperate wish: survival. That night, she made a reckless, beautiful decision, inviting an old woman in from the deadly cold, giving her food, warmth, and shelter. The cost of her simple act of kindness and compassion arrived the very next morning in the form of billionaire Silas Vain, a man who would either save her world or end it. Before we start, your support means everything to us. Like, comment, and subscribe so we can keep creating stories like this. The gale outside was not just noise. It was a physical opponent, tearing at the old sheet metal roof of the Silver Spoon Diner like a vengeful hand, and with every shriek of the wind, 24-year-old Clara heard the echo of her impending failure. She'd been clinging to this place, the one tangible memory left of her father, running on caffeine and pure, terrified stubbornness, ignoring the fact that the 7 remaining customers had fled hours ago, taking their meager tips with them. The $200 weekly deficit loomed large, a ghost in the flickering neon sign, but she couldn't bring herself to lock up. Her apron pockets felt like lead with worry, the silence of the empty diner amplifying the crushing weight of her reality. She was alone, exhausted, and the bank was giving her precisely 0 days more to prove solvency. It was in this moment of absolute despair, right as she reached for the main lock, that the door burst inward, sending a flurry of snow and frigid, penetrating air across the polished floor. Stumbling through the entrance was an old woman, impossibly small against the backdrop of the white fury, her breath ragged and her thin coat offering pathetically little defense against the Arctic blast. The woman was not simply cold. She was past freezing, trembling uncontrollably, her eyes wide with a desperate plea that spoke louder than any words. Every practical voice in Clara's head screamed, "Turn her away. You have no insurance. You need to close and save heat." But Clara saw not an imposition or a liability. She saw a fellow human being at the mercy of the elements. In that instant, the financial ruin, the stress, and the exhaustion evaporated, replaced by a deep, unwavering moral certainty inherited from her kind-hearted, long-gone parents. She threw down the lock key and rushed forward, her strong arms catching the woman before she could collapse. She guided her immediately to the hottest booth, shedding her own jacket and wrapping the woman in the emergency blanket she kept stashed beneath the counter. She did not ask questions about where she came from or where she was going. She simply acted. As she poured the hottest tea she could manage, Clara made an internal vow, a secret commitment that solidified her selfless action. "I won't let another person freeze while this diner is warm." This defiant act of pure, uncalculated compassion, performed in the dead of night at the height of a life-threatening storm, was the most honest thing Clara had done in months. She did it not for a reward, not for recognition, but because she was a good person forced into a desperate situation, and she simply could not look away from suffering. The diner remained open, lit by a small beacon of human decency, waiting for the morning to arrive. Next day, the silence that followed the blizzard night was heavy, broken only by the crackle of the ancient space heater and the distant sound of a snowplow's scrape. Clara, her eyes gritty with exhaustion, but her mind buzzing with the events of the night, was meticulously cleaning the diner, the quiet making the exhaustion more pronounced. The old woman was already gone by the morning without saying goodbye. She was scrubbing the old woman's booth, the one where she had nestled under the emergency blanket, when her hand brushed against something smooth and foreign against the rough vinyl. She retrieved it, a small, exquisitely embroidered linen napkin, clearly out of place in the grease-stained environment of the Silver Spoon Diner. It was folded with impossible precision, a tiny, crisp square of expensive fabric. Her fingers, roughened by years of dishwater, unfolded it slowly, revealing the secret it held. There was no stain or smudge, only one word stitched elegantly into the center in faded, perfect calligraphy: wait. The simplicity of the instruction was a powerful shock. It wasn't a thank you, nor was it a promise. It was a directive, a strange, authoritative command that made the tiny hairs on the back of Clara's neck rise. The elegant quality of the napkin itself suggested a world far removed from the desperate, shivering person she had sheltered. Clara, gripping the fabric, felt an immediate unsettlement in her stomach. The old woman hadn't been merely lost. She had been executing a plan, and Clara had unknowingly been drawn into it. Her departure had been too clean, too silent, too deliberate. The act of compassion Clara had performed was suddenly tainted by the possibility of manipulation, or at least an objective she didn't share. She quickly tucked the napkin deep into her apron pocket, the unusual weight of the fine linen a stark contrast to the usual clutter of pens and order pads. She felt a profound confusion, a sense that the simple moral reward she had expected, the satisfaction of helping someone, had been replaced by a complicated mystery. The quiet, snow-blanketed diner, now bathed in the harsh, clarifying light of dawn, felt less like a safe harbor and more like the waiting room described in the note. The napkin was proof that the kindness shown last night was not an end but a beginning of something. The silence of the snow-covered morning was shattered by a sound that made every alarm bell in Clara's working-class brain ring, the low, throaty purr of an engine that cost more than her entire diner. A sleek, black Mercedes Maybach glided to a stop outside the Silver Spoon, its polished surface untouched by the pervasive grit of the roads. The absurdity of such unashamed wealth pulling up to her humble establishment was jarring. A moment later, the rear door opened, and Silas Vain emerged. He was exactly the type of man Clara recognized from financial news, tall, commanding, and dressed in a charcoal suit so perfectly tailored it looked liquid. He radiated controlled power, a palpable aura of having zero tolerance for waste or inefficiency. Snowflakes, the remnants of the blizzard, dusted his dark hair, but his intense gaze, the color of a winter sky, was immediately fixed on the single glowing window of the diner. He didn't come to eat, he came with a purpose. He walked directly to the door and entered, bringing with him a rush of cold air and an atmosphere of high-stakes corporate tension. Clara, who was wiping down the counter, felt her muscles tighten. She immediately slipped on her professional invisible waitress mask, the one she used to fend off overly familiar customers and maintain distance. Silas ignored the rest of the empty diner, his eyes locking onto Clara with a mixture of immense relief and something like clinical intensity. He approached the counter directly, his voice deep and measured, completely devoid of casual pleasantries. "I'm looking for the woman who was here last night, the waitress who offered my mother shelter," he stated, his intensity demanding an immediate answer. Clara met his gaze steadily, refusing to be intimidated by his presence. "That would be me. I offered shelter to an old woman stranded in the storm, sir," she corrected, subtly shifting the focus from his wealth to her moral act. A flicker of genuine gratitude crossed Silas's stern features before his mask of control snapped back into place. "My mother, Eleanor, was here. You showed her extraordinary courage. What you did is worth more than you know." His words validated the title's high-status promise and introduced the male lead not as a customer, but as a consequence of her decision, effectively ushering in the next act of her life. The humble diner suddenly felt like a stage for an entirely different kind of transaction. The tension in the diner was thick as the melted snow outside, and Clara felt the weight of Silas Vain's intent pressing down on her. He didn't waste time with small talk. He immediately stated the purpose of his arrival, which was to settle a debt. I am prepared to offer you the full market price of this property, plus a substantial compensation package," he declared, his voice carrying the finality of a business deal. "Enough to clear your family's debt, secure your future, and allow you to pursue any other path you choose. Call it a reward for your integrity." He reached inside his tailored suit jacket, not for a weapon, but for a checkbook. The action as casual as pulling out a pen, underscoring the casualness with which he treated sums that would change Clara's life 3 times over. The offer, which should have been a miracle, felt like a heavy, gilded chain. It was transactional, reducing her selfless act to a commodity, a line item to be paid off and forgotten. Clara's shock quickly morphed into a quiet, cold indignation. She had been desperate for money just 12 hours ago, but this offer felt like an insult to the memory of her parents and the principles she had defended against the storm. Her hands, which had been resting on the counter, clenched slightly, and she met his intense gaze, her waitress mask hardening into an expression of unyielding moral resolve. "My kindness isn't for sale, Mr. Vain," she stated clearly, the refusal startling even herself. "I didn't save a billionaire's mother, I sheltered an old woman. You don't get to buy off a moral decision. I refuse your money." Silas paused, his checkbook hovering, the first hint of genuine surprise breaking through his corporate facade. He wasn't accustomed to rejection, especially not rejection of a life-changing sum. Clara's definitive refusal established the core theme for the entire narrative. Courage is the only currency of value. Her integrity, proven under pressure, was the one thing he couldn't acquire, forcing Silas to pivot from transaction to respect. Silas Vain, momentarily stunned by Clara's moral defiance, didn't leave. Instead, the refusal seemed to flip a switch in his highly analytical mind. He recognized the rare quality of the woman before him, not a desperate person, but a person of unyielding principle, a commodity far more valuable than any money could buy. He closed the checkbook, his expression shifting from transactional to intensely intrigued. He leaned against the counter, his imposing presence transforming the humble diner into an impromptu executive meeting. "I apologize, Clara," he said, using her first name for the first time, his tone now respectful. "My mistake was assuming your integrity had a price tag. It clearly does not. That, however, presents me with a different kind of debt." He paused, his sharp eyes assessing her calm demeanor. "I am working to vet a major new ethics policy for the Vain Foundation. It requires someone with an unspoiled perspective, someone who can see through corporate layers to the simple, honest truth. Someone, in fact, who values a good deed over a 7-figure payout." He was offering an alternative, more complex reward. "I want to hire you as a temporary consultant. Highly paid, of course, not as a thank you, but as a strategic asset. You can keep your diner running, pay off those looming bills, and I can use your rare skill set." This offer appealed directly to Clara's hidden genius, touching the dormant corporate executive she had been forced to bury. The thought of using her strategic mind again, of fighting for ethics rather than just scraping by, was a powerful lure. Clara hesitated, but the logical side of her brain recognized a chance to earn the money honestly while keeping her pride intact. She met his gaze, setting her own term. "I'll accept the consultation, Mr. Vain, but on my terms. It is purely professional, and you will not inquire into my past beyond what is relevant to the Foundation's ethics. If you cross that line, I walk." Silas gave her a slow, appreciative nod. "Deal," he said, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "Welcome aboard, consultant." With the quiet exchange of terms, Clara had successfully stepped into his high-stakes world, activating the necessary tension and setting the stage for the dramatic conflicts to come. all while securing her family's immediate financial survival. The humble waitress had just agreed to advise a billionaire on ethics, ensuring the connection to the overall narrative arc. Clara found herself sitting opposite Silas Vain in his immense, silent penthouse office, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling glass that offered a dizzying view of the city, a world she had once belonged to and then been brutally exiled from. The air was thin with wealth and ambition. They were reviewing the Foundation's documents, discussing case studies of professional misconduct, but Silas, ever the keen observer, wasn't truly focused on the paperwork. He was focused on her, sensing the coiled tension beneath her precise, intelligent commentary. He pushed gently, testing the boundary she had established. "Your insight into corporate double-dealing is clinical, Clara," he noted, leaning back slightly. "It suggests experience far beyond managing a roadside diner. It suggests a career, a significant one, in a pressure cooker environment. You're an executive hiding in an apron. Why?" The question was gentle, but the honesty in his gaze was a command. Clara's guard, already weakened by the unexpected kindness of his defense and the sheer weight of his presence, finally cracked. She set down her pen, the small sound echoing in the vast space. The weight of her secret, which she had carried like a physical burden for 3 years, suddenly felt unbearable. She met his gaze, the harsh city light illuminating the sudden vulnerability in her eyes. "I didn't choose the diner, it chose me after I had nothing left," she admitted, her voice low and steady despite the wave of old pain. She then revealed the heart of her tragedy. She had been a rising corporate executive, close to launching her own firm when her mentor and business partner, a man she trusted completely, betrayed her. He had systematically stolen her clients, fabricated evidence of her professional instability, and used his influence to blacklist her from the entire industry. "I trusted the wrong man, someone who used my ambition against me," she confessed. "When I tried to fight back, he destroyed my reputation so thoroughly that I had to disappear. I didn't run away. I simply had nowhere left to go but to the only place that didn't ask questions, the silver spoon." The raw honesty of the admission hung in the air, transforming her from a mystery to a deeply flawed, yet immensely capable survivor. This revelation established her as the hidden genius, a figure whose current low status was not due to failure, but to betrayal, justifying the immediate bond with Silas and setting the stage for her future professional redemption. The following day, Clara accompanied Silas Vain to the Vain Foundation's headquarters for her first official day of consultation, a dizzying vertical climb into a realm of pure corporate power. She was seated in a chrome and glass conference room, running through her initial assessment of the Foundation's oversight structure, when the door opened and Marcus, the vice president, entered. Marcus was the antithesis of Silas, smooth, overly polished, and possessed of a chillingly condescending air. Silas introduced them with a simple statement: "Clara is consulting with us to vet the Foundation's new ethics framework." Marcus offered Clara a brief, dismissive nod and then immediately focused his displeasure on Silas. He made no effort to hide his disdain for Clara, viewing her as an unnecessary complication and, more dangerously, an unknown factor. "I'm sure your perspective is charming, Silas," Marcus stated, his voice laced with thinly veiled sarcasm as he glanced at Clara's modest attire. "But we require certified expertise for this, not charity cases. The board won't approve having a waitress involved in the governance structure." Clara felt the familiar, hot sting of professional dismissal, a wound Marcus had opened effortlessly. She maintained her composure, her eyes steady on Marcus, and offered a calculated, precise defense of her analysis that instantly showcased her hidden genius. She didn't argue status, she argued data. Marcus, stunned by her immediate, articulate defense of her initial findings, quickly retreated behind a facade of cold professionalism, but the hostility in his gaze was palpable. He had sized her up as a cheap public relations stunt, but she had just revealed herself to be a genuine threat to his established corporate comfort. His disdain for her lack of traditional credentials and his underlying jealousy of her sudden close proximity to Silas established him as the clear antagonist and initiated the professional subplot, ensuring that Clara's fight for redemption would have a human face. The initial professional tension between Silas Vain and Clara melted away during an intensely focused, late-night work session spent poring over the Foundation's dense financial documents. The blizzard outside had given way to a quiet, cold night, and the immense penthouse office was dimly lit, fostering an atmosphere of shared purpose. Clara's hidden genius was on full display. Her ability to spot irregularities and understand complex corporate structures was instantly evident and deeply impressed Silas. They worked for hours in tandem, fueled by lukewarm coffee and the adrenaline of identifying potential pitfalls in the Foundation's accounting. As they took a break, the conversation naturally drifted from balance sheets to deeper truths. Silas, observing Clara's unwavering dedication and ethical clarity, dropped his usual corporate guard, revealing his deep-seated skepticism toward everyone in his world. "You see patterns no one else does," he admitted, his voice quiet. "And you're not afraid to point out where the numbers hide a lie. In my life, everyone has an agenda, Clara. I'm used to seeing people try to flatter me or acquire something from me." He paused, looking at her with an intensity that transcended business. "You're the first person in 10 years I haven't suspected of having an agenda. You've only ever acted with integrity, first at your diner, and now here." He confessed to the immense isolation his wealth imposed, making him perpetually wary. Clara, in turn, acknowledged his vulnerability, understanding his pain was rooted in the same professional betrayals she had suffered. This shared moment of honesty forged a powerful, undeniable connection between them. The professional partnership cemented their bond, but it was this mutual vulnerability and the intellectual respect that solidified the romantic subplot. They were no longer a billionaire and a waitress. They were two survivors finding a rare, honest, safe harbor in each other, making the impending professional attack a devastating threat to their newfound trust. The fragile, intimate trust forged between Clara and Silas Vain in the penthouse office was violently broken by the harsh reality of the corporate world. It happened mid-morning, during a routine ethics meeting, when Silas's assistant, looking pale and nervous, discreetly handed him a tablet. The screen displayed a damning article that had just gone viral, sourced anonymously, but containing intimate, twisted details of Clara's past. The headline screamed about a billionaire's gold-digger waitress who had staged a cynical kindness act during the blizzard as a calculated maneuver to secure a position and eventually a payout from Vain's empire. The article painted Clara's entire corporate history, her rising success, her betrayal, and her subsequent flight as evidence of her professional instability and opportunistic character. It detailed her blacklisting and expertly weaponized the most painful, humiliating aspects of her past, transforming her into a villain. Clara, who was watching Silas's face as he read the piece, felt a visceral, cold spike of panic and shame. The fear of exposure she had carried for years had just become a brutal public reality. It was a professional assassination, precise and ruthless, and it hit every single one of her vulnerabilities. She knew immediately that this was not a coincidence. It was a targeted hit, orchestrated by someone who had access to both her confidential background and Silas's inner circle. Her eyes darted to the empty chair where Marcus usually sat, a chilling suspicion solidifying into conviction. The article was a devastating blow, not just to her nascent reputation within the Foundation, but to her soul. It accused her of the very thing she had fiercely refused in the diner, turning a good deed into a transaction. Her worst fear, that she would be professionally destroyed and publicly humiliated again, had been realized, and she was forced to confront the terrible possibility that Silas, despite his reassurances, might be using her past as a public relations weapon, thus plunging the entire narrative into the emotional test that would soon follow. The brutal public attack, the swirling accusations of being a calculated gold digger, drove Clara back to the penthouse, not seeking comfort, but demanding answers. The betrayal felt terrifyingly familiar, resurrecting the trauma of her former partner's deceit. She stormed into Silas Vain's office, the newspaper headlines clutched in her trembling hand, her face white with a cold, protective fury. She completely bypassed her usual respect for his status, her voice shaking with the intensity of her pain. "The story always ends the same way, Silas. I won't be ruined twice, especially not by the person who promised to help me," she accused, leveling the deepest fear in her heart at him. She was convinced that the exposure was too accurate, too timely to be mere journalistic chance. She believed Silas had leaked her past, either as a controlled public relations play or, worse, to test her loyalty before discarding her. The raw anguish in her eyes accused him of the ultimate corporate sin, using her honesty as a manipulative tool. Silas, who was genuinely blindsided by the article, was hurt and completely confused by her immediate assumption of his guilt. He realized that her past betrayal had created a deep, structural distrust within her. He was unable to immediately defend himself against a pain so deep. His usual composure fractured as he wrestled with the gravity of her accusation. The emotional low point of the story was reached as their hard-won trust collapsed under the weight of Marcus's calculated deception. Clara, overwhelmed and defensive, felt she had been right all along. No matter how high she climbed, powerful men would always betray her. The relationship hung by a single, fragile thread: the undeniable honesty of the old woman's presence during the blizzard, setting the stage for the crucial confrontation that would reveal the true enemy and revalidate their partnership. Hurt and desperate to prove his innocence to Clara, Silas Vain did the one thing his structured world advised against. He made a frantic emotional call to his mother, Eleanor, demanding an explanation for her presence at the diner, a presence that was now tearing his life apart. He explained the nature of the online attack on Clara, the accusation that the entire shelter incident was staged for financial gain, and the resulting collapse of trust. Eleanor listened, her usual gentle voice hardening with steely resolve as she realized the true depth of the corporate attack. She then delivered the complete, shocking truth that reframed the entire story. Eleanor admitted the blizzard incident was staged, but not by Clara. It was staged by her. "I wasn't lost in the storm, Silas. I was running from Marcus," she confessed, the revelation hanging heavy in the air. She explained that Marcus, knowing Silas was consumed by a high-stakes merger, was actively manipulating financial reports and attempting to force her into an early, silent retirement to gain control of her shares and ultimately usurp her influence over the company. She told Silas she couldn't risk exposing Marcus directly to him because she suspected Marcus was monitoring Silas's communications. Eleanor used the diner and Clara's act of spontaneous goodness as a moral litmus test. She needed to find a person of unshakable integrity, someone Marcus wouldn't suspect, to be her eyes and ears, and to whom she could safely pass a warning. "The only person in the city who could resist your money and act with pure courage was the one I needed, Eleanor stated. I used Clara's integrity as a beacon. This unexpected twist fully revealed the true nature of the antagonist. It was not an external threat, but a betrayal by his right-hand man, and cemented the narrative. Truth. The conflict was never Silas versus Clara, but the Vain family integrity versus Marcus's corporate corruption. The revelation instantly exonerated Silas and vindicated Clara's initial moral decision, setting the stage for their immediate, unified counterattack. The phone call with Eleanor ended, leaving Silas Vain in a state of stunned, volcanic silence. He stood rigid in the center of his opulent office, the expansive city view now a blur behind his furiously processing mind. The full, catastrophic weight of the revelation that his mother had been fleeing for her safety, and that the source of her distress, the architect of the online character assassination against Clara, was Marcus. His trusted vice president of 10 years hit him with the force of a physical blow. He didn't initially rage. His fury was a cold internal force, focused entirely on the shame of his own blindness. He had been so consumed by his professional world, so assured of his judgment, that he had missed the blatant, greedy ambition right beside him, and had almost allowed that snake to destroy the one truly honest person who had entered his life. The public attack on Clara, the engineered story of the gold-digger waitress, was no longer a complication. It was a devastating act of war against his family and against integrity itself. His initial confusion and hurt over Clara's accusations transformed into a white-hot protective fury. He finally understood her panic, her immediate relapse into distrust. She wasn't being paranoid. She was reacting to a trauma Marcus had perfectly weaponized. The true nature of the enemy was now clear. Marcus was not just a corporate rival, but a profound personal and ethical threat. Silas realized that the single act of kindness Clara showed Eleanor had inadvertently provided the only defense the Vain family had. The woman he had almost dismissed as a transactional reward was now his most valuable strategic asset. He strode across the office, the energy of his controlled rage thrumming through the air, and found Clara, who was still reeling from the accusation that she was a fraud. He didn't waste time on explanations or apologies, knowing a show of weakness was a luxury they couldn't afford. He looked at her, his intense gray eyes reflecting his absolute determination, now fully committing himself to their joint future. He didn't leak your past, Clara. He weaponized it. Marcus is the enemy, not me. My mother confirmed it. This was all staged to destabilize the company and discredit anyone who stands in his way, he revealed, his voice low and dangerous. He accepted his mother's word and, more importantly, Clara's fundamental moral compass, without question. The reward character was fully redeemed, shifting from a powerful but blind executive to a fully loyal partner fueled by the need for vengeance and justice. He reached out, not to touch her, but to brace himself against the counter, his jaw set. We're done running, now we fight. And we fight on your terms, Clara. You saw him first. Tell me how we destroy him. This complete submission to her judgment, transforming him from CEO to tactical ally, cemented their partnership, marking the definitive end of the test of trust and setting the narrative on its course toward the strategic climax. The realization of Marcus's deep-seated betrayal acted not as a breaking point, but as the catalyst that finally shattered the last of Clara's self-imposed limitations. Unleashing the hidden genius she had desperately tried to bury within the mundane routine of the diner. With Silas Vain now fully aligned and utterly dedicated to her cause, Clara transformed from the victimized survivor into the strategic executive she was always meant to be. The panic and shame of the public attack evaporated, replaced by a cold, calculating resolve that both impressed and slightly intimidated Silas. She dismissed his initial, rage-driven idea of a direct, confrontational public exposure, arguing that Marcus would simply leverage his corporate defenses and legal teams to silence them. Just as her own mentor had 3 years prior. Her analysis was precise and surgical. "He's not fighting the family, he's fighting the books," she asserted, her voice ringing with newfound authority in the sterile expanse of the penthouse office. "Marcus knows we can beat him on integrity, but he's already planning to beat us on assets. We don't fight his gossip, we fight his books, and we hit him where he's most vulnerable, his fraud." Clara immediately took the lead, drawing upon the intimate, painful knowledge she possessed of white-collar crime and corporate sabotage. She quickly theorized that Marcus's reckless ambition wouldn't stop at merely attempting to usurp the company. He would have initiated or been involved in multiple hidden, fraudulent financial schemes to cover the tracks of his growing debts or to rapidly increase his personal stake, making him an easy target if they knew where to look. She directed Silas to pull specific, complex financial statements related to 2 key shadow acquisitions Marcus had championed over the past 18 months, instructing Silas to look not for overt fraud, but for subtle, recurring anomalies in revenue reporting and supplier contracts, the classic cook the books pattern she had been ruined for exposing in her past life. This moment was crucial, representing Clara's definitive shift in the narrative. She was no longer a passive recipient of Silas's help, but the tactical mind directing the counteroffensive. Her calm under pressure, combined with her specialized knowledge, proved to Silas that his mother's moral beacon test was accurate, validating his decision to trust her over his 10-year partner. Silas watched her work, his expression shifting from gratitude to genuine admiration. He had the resources, but Clara had the specific intelligence and the moral clarity necessary to find the hidden weaknesses in the corporate armor. The partnership solidified into an unbreakable strategic alliance rooted not in affection, but in a shared righteous drive for justice, setting the stage for the dramatic and necessary exposure of the antagonist. Her hidden genius was now fully deployed against the very type of man who had sought to destroy her, giving her command of the narrative leading into the final trap. With Clara's meticulously gathered financial insights providing the perfect blueprint, the strategic alliance moved to execute the final high-stakes trap, requiring Clara to face the antagonist directly on his own turf. The chosen location was a notoriously lavish, exclusive Italian restaurant, favored by the city's corporate elite, a venue where Marcus felt utterly untouchable, reinforcing the stark contrast between his pretentious world and the simple integrity of the Silver Spoon diner. Clara, dressed in a borrowed, sharp power suit that resurrected her former corporate confidence, initiated the private meeting, approaching Marcus under the guise of fear and desperation. She maintained a flawless facade of a woman completely broken by his public attack, offering him a seemingly irresistible final deal. She would take a large, non-disclosure agreement-backed cash payout, resign from her consultancy role immediately, and vanish from the city forever, never speaking another word about the Vain Foundation or the Vain family. Marcus, blinded by his own arrogance and his profound underestimation of Clara's intelligence, swallowed the bait whole. He saw her terrified vulnerability as confirmation of his power and the success of his character assassination plot, completely missing the calculating precision behind her eyes. His smug confidence swelled, and he began to gloat, allowing his professional mask to slip in the belief that he was securing a clean, final victory. He spent the initial 15 minutes of the meeting detailing the supposed finality of her public downfall, confirming his malicious intent and the effectiveness of his engineered online attack. The conversation then shifted to the payout, and as Clara pushed him for specifics on the money, Marcus, feeling untouchable in the high-end establishment, began to reveal the true depth of his corporate scheme. He dismissed the potential scrutiny of the payout money by stating, "The funds are completely clean. They're routed through a holding company established for the Zion acquisition, a shell that will be dissolved once the final fraudulent reports clear. It's the same method I used for the Aegis deal last year, you amateur. You're getting my table scraps." This single, arrogant slip was the crucial piece of evidence. Marcus had just definitively connected the funds intended for her silence to a specific, ongoing fraudulent scheme, and critically confirmed a pattern of deceit by referencing a previous, questionable corporate acquisition. Clara, maintaining her fearful posture, subtly acknowledged the details, ensuring Marcus felt secure in his revelation. Meanwhile, Silas Vain, listening remotely from a van parked a strategic 2 blocks away, was recording the entire conversation, utilizing advanced surveillance technology to capture the criminal admission. The trap was perfectly sprung. Clara had successfully lured Marcus into providing the undeniable audio evidence of corporate fraud, not just against Silas, but against the law itself, ensuring that his downfall would be swift and catastrophic, fulfilling the final necessary step before the climax. Her composure in the face of the man who had professionally destroyed her years ago was the ultimate display of courage, transforming her professional reclamation from a hope into a guaranteed reality. The scene inside the lavish Italian restaurant reached its dramatic apex the moment Marcus, bloated with arrogance and convinced of his untouchable power, uttered the final, incriminating words detailing his corporate fraud. The reference to the Zion and Aegis deals, coupled with the admission of routing funds through a shell company to conceal the fraudulent reports, was the ultimate professional surrender. Clara, maintaining the perfect facade of a woman terrified into submission, watched the smug, hateful expression on his face, feeling not panic, but a deep, ice-cold satisfaction. She had achieved what her former mentor had prevented 3 years ago, undeniable, tangible proof. Marcus, believing he had successfully purchased her silence and cemented his path to the top, reached for the bottle of expensive wine to toast his victory, a moment of excessive confidence that sealed his fate. That was the pre-arranged signal. Outside the establishment, Silas Vain, who had been listening to every single second of the confession through the discreetly placed microphone, paused the recording. The quality was crystal clear, a devastating narrative of greed and betrayal, complete with the antagonist's own voice providing the context. With a single sharp command transmitted via a coded text message, Silas initiated the final phase of the operation. Before Marcus could pour the wine, 2 large, impeccably dressed men, who had been posing as restaurant patrons, moved with silent, professional speed toward their table. Marcus, momentarily confused, recognized the sharp, unsettling authority in the men's eyes. They weren't waiters, they were Vain security. He attempted to bluff, his voice a strained, arrogant bark. "What is the meaning of this? You cannot interrupt a private business meeting." Clara simply rose from the table, her composure absolute, and looked at him with an expression that held 3 years of righteous fury and pain. "It stops now, Marcus," she said, her voice steady and clear. "The meeting is over, and the audit is beginning." The visible shock and sudden, desperate panic that washed over Marcus's face provided Clara with the ultimate moment of closure. As the security detail firmly, but non-violently, escorted the sputtering, outraged vice president out of the exclusive restaurant, his desperate pleas and threats fading into the background of whispered gossip, Clara felt an immense physical weight lift from her shoulders. The shame, the constant anxiety of being exposed, and the trauma of her previous professional ruin were gone. She had achieved vindication not by running or by gossip, but through superior intelligence and unwavering integrity. She had used her experience as a victim of white-collar crime to become the hunter, achieving not just justice for herself, but securing Silas's company and his mother's legacy. This moment represented the professional climax of the story, signaling the definitive defeat of the antagonist and clearing the path for the emotional and romantic reward that was waiting. The waitress had won the corporate war, proving that character, not credentials, was the true measure of power. The frantic, high-stakes confrontation and Marcus's subsequent arrest left Clara and Silas Vain emotionally and physically drained, but profoundly victorious. They retreated immediately to the immense solitude of the penthouse office, the setting that had witnessed the forging and breaking of their trust. The weight of the world, which had pressed down on Clara since the day her corporate life ended 3 years ago, lifted in the moment Marcus was taken away. She stood by the panoramic window, watching the city lights, no longer as a fugitive hiding in plain sight, but as a victor. Silas approached her, his usual CEO veneer completely gone, replaced by a raw, genuine human vulnerability that she found more compelling than any display of power. He didn't speak of the corporate victory, the stock price stabilization, or the foundation's recovered reputation. He spoke only of her. "You saved us," he said, his voice quiet but resonant with feeling. "You didn't just save my mother's dignity, you saved me from my own blindness, from the arrogance of believing my judgment was infallible. I spent a decade cultivating people I thought were loyal, only to find the only honest person in my life was a stranger I met because she refused a bribe." He acknowledged the immense pain he had caused by doubting her, apologizing not with flowery language, but with absolute sincerity. "I failed the trust test, Clara. You passed. I have no right to ask you to stay, but I have to tell you the truth. You're the first thing I've wanted that I can't acquire, only earn." He moved closer, his proximity no longer imposing, but inviting. Clara turned to face him. The tears she hadn't allowed herself to shed during the confrontation finally falling, not from sadness, but from overwhelming relief and the realization that the man standing before her was not the cold, transactional figure she had initially feared, but a deeply flawed, fiercely loyal partner. The emotional climax of their story culminated in this moment of mutual confession. She confessed the paralyzing fear that had governed her life since the betrayal, and he confessed the equally paralyzing isolation of his wealth. She reached out, placing her hand gently on his tailored suit jacket, a gesture that signaled not professional respect, but profound intimacy. "You had every reason to doubt me, Silas, but you came back. You believed the waitress over the vice president," she whispered. "That's all that matters." Their relationship, built on shared trauma and validated by a successful fight for justice, finally ascended to romance. Silas leaned in, his gaze asking permission, his touch hesitant and respectful. The first kiss was tender, sincere, and long awaited a seal on their partnership, a promise of a future built on 4 pillars: honesty, courage, shared purpose, and a fierce, earned affection. This final, profound moment of connection cemented the narrative arc, transitioning the story from crisis and vindication to the final personal reward, proving that their bond was strong enough to withstand both professional sabotage and the ghosts of her painful past. The kiss was not an acquisition. It was a mutual surrender to the one genuine connection in their complicated lives. The emotional dust had barely settled from the intensity of the confession and the profound, healing first kiss when Eleanor, who had been quietly managing the company's damage control from a secure line, entered the penthouse office. Her expression was one of quiet triumph and immense pride. She carried a sleek, customized employment contract, not a corporate file, but a testament to Clara's proven worth. Eleanor looked directly at Clara, her gaze filled with the gratitude of a woman whose legacy had been saved, and offered the first proposal, one that was purely professional yet deeply personal. "Clara," Eleanor stated, her voice strong and steady, "the security and ethics of the Vain Foundation, and frankly, the Vain legacy, now rest on the foundation of your integrity. You didn't just save us from Marcus's fraud, you proved the kind of courage and clarity our board needs. I am officially recommending you for the permanent position of Vice President of Corporate Integrity." This offer was the complete professional reclamation of Clara's career, the ultimate vindication against the betrayal of 3 years past. It wasn't a handout, it was a deeply earned title, secured by her refusal of Silas's money and her successful strategic takedown of the antagonist. Clara accepted, not with hesitancy, but with a quiet, authoritative confidence, having proven her qualifications under the highest possible pressure. Just as the significance of this massive career shift was sinking in, Silas Vain stepped forward, his eyes locked on Clara's. He bypassed the traditional corporate romance tropes and instead anchored his proposal in the ethical theme that had brought them together, knowing that Clara valued truth above all else. He took her hand, his touch steady and sincere. "My mother just offered you the most powerful position in the company, one you earned," he began, his voice dropping to a heartfelt, intimate level. "Now I have to make the most powerful proposal of my life. You taught me that integrity is the real wealth. You taught me what it means to choose right over easy and what it feels like to trust completely. I don't want an accessory or a partner for my company. I want a partner for my life. I want the woman who saw through all the layers of my wealth and status to the simple man who needed help." He reached into his pocket and presented a small velvet box, opening it to reveal a ring that wasn't ostentatious but elegant and timeless. "Marry me, Clara, not for the vain name or the vain money, but because you are the only person who can keep me honest. Say yes to the man who finally knows how to value courage." Clara's heart, which had been hardened by years of betrayal and fear, swelled with an overwhelming absolute joy. The double proposal represented the ultimate narrative reward. She gained the career she lost, but on her own terms, and she gained the unconditional, honest love of a man who was once the definition of the transactional world she had fled. She looked from the ring to Silas's sincere, hopeful face, and accepted the second proposal with certainty and profound emotion, completing the journey from the humble diner to the height of corporate and personal partnership. Her two rewards were secured simultaneously, cementing the victory of character over cunning. 6 months later, the tumultuous journey that began in the middle of a blizzard reached its serene, satisfying conclusion. The immense wealth and power of the Vain empire, once a source of Clara's fear, was now harnessed for good, guided by her moral compass. Marcus's exposure led to a swift and comprehensive corporate restructuring. He faced federal charges for the Xeon and Aegis fraudulent acquisitions, and the company was praised nationally for its transparency and decisive action, stabilizing the stock and validating Silas's commitment to integrity. The Silver Spoon Diner, which had served as the accidental birthplace of their partnership, was now completely transformed. Clara and Clara, using a joint investment from the Vain Foundation, had purchased and renovated the property into the Eleanor Vain Community Outreach Center, offering job training and resources for small business owners and those displaced by corporate downsizing, turning Clara's personal trauma into a lasting, positive legacy. This final act was the tangible manifestation of their shared value system. The culmination of the story was their intimate wedding celebration held at the newly finished center, deliberately keeping the ceremony small and authentic, far from the suffocating grandeur of the corporate world. Clara, no longer the fearful waitress hiding her light, stood beside Silas, radiant and confident, the vice president of corporate integrity and now his wife. Her new title was the permanent, irrefutable proof of her hidden genius and vindication. Silas, looking at Clara with a love that was absolute and free of any transactional calculation, raised a glass to the small crowd of family, friends, and grateful former diners. "This place," he announced, his voice filled with emotion, "is proof that the strongest foundations are built not in the boardroom, but in a blizzard. It started with one simple, selfless act, and it led us to the most honest truth either of us has ever known." He publicly credited Clara for saving his family, his company, and his soul. Clara smiled, her heart full, looking at Eleanor, who beamed with motherly pride, knowing her risky test had secured the future of her lineage. Later, in a quiet moment away from the celebration, Clara rested her head against Silas's shoulder, watching the gentle lights of the center shine out into the winter night. "Sometimes," she murmured, the wisdom earned through betrayal clear in her voice, "the hardest challenges bring the best rewards. And sometimes, the only way to heal a painful past is to use that pain to fight for a better future." Silas gently squeezed her hand, looking forward to a life shared with a woman who had taught him that true power lay in moral clarity, not monetary value. Their relationship, built on the unusual pillars of a corporate crisis and a 500-word narrative, stood as a testament to the inspirational power of courage and the unwavering belief that integrity always finds its reward. Their final resolution was a perfect circle. The woman who sought shelter in a diner found a new life, and the billionaire who sought to buy off a good deed ended up earning the one thing money could never acquire: genuine, honest love. If this incredible journey from a humble diner to a corporate pinnacle inspired you to believe that your integrity is your greatest asset, please give this video a thumbs up and share your thoughts below. We love reading how stories of courage impact you. Every subscription and notification bell ring helps us continue to spotlight the unsung heroes who choose what is right over what is easy. And finally, share this video with someone who needs to be reminded of this truth. Your big break won't come from a rigged system or a compromise. It will come from one act of genuine kindness, one moment when you refuse the transaction, or one stand against a lie. Clara proved that you don't need a high-rise office to have a high moral ground. Thank you for witnessing her victory.